Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. I'm sure you love these days as much as I do. It's always a great feeling, Thanksgiving, being thankful for what we have and appreciate what we have. And we have so much to be thankful in spite of any challenge that we may have. One of the challenges that many people have, and it's the most difficult challenge, is challenges in relationships. If you have a challenge in a relationship with your spouse, if you have a challenge in a relationship with your children, with your parents, and sometimes it comes out of the blue, you didn't expect it. You never expected you'll be dealing with these challenges. But that affects you globally if you're struggling with a relationship. So the Holy Torah we have gives us great insights. And this week's Torah portion is one of them. This week's Torah portion tells us one of the most perplexing stories of the Torah. You know, sitting outside, you got some of these mosquitoes. The story of Jacob marrying two sisters. So the story goes that this week's portion tells us that Jacob was running away from his brother Esau, comes to a well, that's where they hang out, that's where you meet all the girls. He comes to a well, he sees Rachel, he falls in love with her, he wants to marry her, he goes to his father-in-law, says, I want to marry Rachel. The night of the wedding, instead of marrying Rachel, he marries Leah. Now Rachel and Leah was the older sister, Leah, they were twins, so it was easy to get fooled. In the morning he says, oh my God, I didn't expect to marry Leah, I was expecting to marry Rachel. And he ends up also marrying Rachel, which we're not going to get now into all the details, how he can marry two sisters. And what happens? The Torah tells us something which is quite shocking. And I quote, Torah tells us that Jacob cohabitates with Rachel also, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah, and he worked with him yet another 7 years. And the next verse says, which is quite surprising, and God saw that Leah was hated, so he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. What's going on here? Jacob is one of our patriarchs, and the Torah tells us he hates his wife. Isn't that a very negative trait? If you hate your wife, get divorced, right? The Torah tells us, our rabbis tell us that you should never be in a relationship that you hate the other person. I mean, if you hate them for a day or two, okay, no. But hate them, either figure out a way not to hate them or get divorced. What is the Torah teaching us? That Jacob hated her. So many of the rabbis go into different interpretations, what's going on over here, which I'm not going to get into right now. But I'd like to share with you something that the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad Hasidic movement, shared, something based on Jewish mysticism. He says like this, everything in the Torah is a message for us. What's the message of Rachel and Leah? Now, today's days, we're not allowed to even marry two wives, even though according to the Torah, biblically, you're technically allowed to have two wives, but today's, you're not allowed to marry two wives, especially not two sisters. So what's the message for us to Rachel and Leah? So Jewish mysticism explains that within ourselves, within every relationship, we have two dimensions. We have the Rachel dimension and the Leah dimension. The Rachel dimension is the conscious, the Leah dimension is the subconscious. Meaning, the Rachel, the conscious level, is usually the level that we love and we can appreciate. Why? You see something in your spouse, you can grasp. You see something in your children, you can grasp and you understand. You love it, you appreciate it. When is there a challenge in a relationship? When it's something that you can't grasp and can't understand. It's something deeper than you. It's something that's deep in your consciousness. Sometimes you hate another person, it has nothing to do with the other person, but it's more something that's going on within yourself. And that's why you hate the person, because it brings out something within yourself that you don't want to deal with. Or the other person does something that you can't understand. Why is my spouse, why is my child, why is my parents, why is my friend behaving a certain way that you can't grasp and you can't wrap your head around it, and you hate it because you can't understand it. But what happened at the end? Jacob had to be married to her, and it says, the Torah tells us that God actually gave birth to Leah, because that's really the level that we need to get in touch with the most. Why? Because that really brings us to the depth of who we are, is the subconscious. And that's something that the Torah is teaching us. In every relationship, you have two levels, you have two dimensions, you have the conscious and the subconscious. So when you start hating another person in a relationship, you have to ask yourself, what is it in me that's causing me to hate the other person? Or what is it in the other person that I can't grasp that's causing me to feel that way? Now, sometimes you hate a person because it's something that they really are bad people. But then you also have to realize that sometimes that God sets it up that way is really to learn something about ourselves. And that's something that we have to take care of. And that's something that Jacob started doing. So sometimes we hate things because they are bad for us, but not always. Some things we hate because we are scared of their truth, or because we are scared to open ourselves up to unknown horizons. We hate them because they make us feel ignorant and vulnerable. Yet, as the Torah puts it so shockingly simple and profound, and God saw, and I'm quoting the Bible, and God saw that Leah was hated, so he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. It is often in that which we are so afraid of that allows us to give birth to our deepest soul powers. So when something really bothers you and something really scares you, don't run away from it. Embrace it. From surrounding yourselves only with things that make you feel in control, you remain barren. But exposing yourself to the unknown, you can give birth to greatness. Shabbat Shalom.